Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Quarantine with Brennifry. As always, I'm Tori. We have a super fun day today. We're going to be talking about Young Justice Outsiders. Very fun. We're all big Young Justice fans. Week so far. It's summer, finally. School is out for me. Grades are in. I am free. I've done nothing but play too many video games until my eyes hurt. I've done nothing but stay awake until midnight and sleep until 9. I'm a mess and out of control. But that's been my life because that's who I am over summer. Yeah, my share of the week is my Eraserhead figure from My Hero Academia, or Boku no Hero if you are annoying. And but yeah, I got him for Christmas, I think, from my stepmom. Very happy. I love him very much. I felt he was a pretty good share for today because the fandom, I mean, there's like absolutely no proof of this, but the fandom swears he's married to Present Mike and that they've adopted the one kid with mind control powers and now Eri, and they're just like one big gay family. But that seems to be what the fans want to happen. And I mean, I'm sure, why not? Yeah, that's my share. I'm going to pass it on over to Brenda.
Excuse me. Hi, everyone. My week has been pretty busy. I've continued the boot camps for next semester training, and I've been finishing the final touches on my summer syllabus. So it's been a pretty busy week. When I'm not on my computer, I'm trying to distract myself with Animal Crossing, and that is a time suck and a half. But then I also started watching Pose this week, and on Tori's recommendation, and I'm a wreck. I am an absolute emotional wreck because it's so good. But that's a preview for next week. My share of the week is my Buffy the Vampire Slayer figurine. I got this at WonderCon. So it's Buffy, Willow, and then Spike with the little blanket that he wears so that the sun won't burn him. And they're all really happy. She's holding a little stake, which I think is super cute. And then behind they have like a little tombstone and a little hand reaching out. And this is one of my favorite things. Buffy merch is not easy to come by. So when I saw this, I think Jen pointed it out. I think she saw it from like across the room and basically ran to get it. And I followed because I love Buffy. And so, yeah, this is one of my favorite figurines.
Does it say like the company, like what like company it's from?
I want to say it was a Q-Fig, but I'm not entirely sure. Did we get him at the Q-Fig stand, Jen?
We did.
Okay, then yes, it's a Q-Fig.
Very cute, very cute. I like Q-Fig a lot. I need to invest.
All right, so I'm going to pass it over to Jen.
Hi, guys. Well, if you heard that, that's my dog.
Oh, on hell.
He likes to be very noisy. So I don't even know what time is anymore. I think I just lost all sense of time and just direction. I don't even know how we ended the week or when the week starts anymore and what a weekend is. I don't know. That's kind of where my head is right now, and it's a very strange thing. I know it usually happens around summer for me, back when I actually had a summer, so it's kind of nice that I'm home again and actually can have a summer with my dog and, be home and just, nest. But I also haven't had this feeling for a very long time, but also 4 months into, stay-at-home orders or something like that. So it's a little bit of a hard adjust. My sleep schedule is completely ruined. I tell this all the time to them and also to other of my friends. I'm someone that can easily go back to grad school time. I'm very nocturnal by nature, so I can stay up, except that I have work in the morning. So that's really been a wreck for me. But it's one of those consequences of being home and just, being able to nest at home is that I'm like, oh, it's only 12 o'clock at night. I can go on for 2 more hours. So that's kind of been my life. A lot of Animal Crossing, like Brenda. Very excited about the new update that's coming on, where you can dive. That's amazing. So I'm really happy about that. And this game just wants me to pour 1,000 hours into it, apparently. So I'm gonna let it. So a lot of TV too. I just don't remember what TV I'm watching. I did start It's Okay Not to Be Okay. It's an odd little K-drama on Netflix, but it's really well done. It's actually the director is the director from Encounter, and that's what Brenda's watching. And it's very artistic, and the first episode opens with clay animation, and it's like a fairy tale intro into the story. And so it's very creative, and I'm very invigorated to see that like this kind of production's coming out of a K-drama and coming out of Korea, and for like something that's a TV series and dealing with mental health. So I'm really excited about this.
Sorry, is this the K-drama with the guy from You From Another Star?
Yes. He's doing really well. Yeah.
What was that?
But
Sorry.
I'm really he's doing really well in it. I'm really intrigued by this idea of following, fairy tales, not the Disney fairy tales, but the Han Christensen fairy tales, and how dark they were, and just what that, the morals that were behind the story, the underpinnings of that story, and how that's being used as like in parallel or as a framing device to talk about mental health. So I really am intrigued by that. But in terms of share of the week, this is my share of the week.
You cute.
Oh God, I'm in love with them.
So Chip and Dale, and they're wearing their little rain outfits. And I love Chip and Dale so much. It's actually like a running joke with me and Brenda that we're one and the other. And this is, I think, just an exclusive in Japan. So I actually got this off of eBay because I get what I want. And I get my mind to it. So I was able to find this thing on eBay and was able to score it, but this is a Japanese exclusive. I don't think is available in the States yet. So I'm really happy about these guys.
They're so cute.
And also why I'm a terrible person to shop for, because I'll just get what I want.
Yeah, so she'll have her eye on something, and I'll be like, oh, that's great. I'll log it away for her birthday. And then months before her birthday, oh, look what I got. And you're like, oh.
Mm-hmm. I'm always like, Brenda, does Jen have this? And I'll have this like huge list of these really cool things I found. And she's like, yeah, she has all of those. I'm like, dang it.
I'm sorry, guys.
I did forget to add. Sorry, go ahead.
I should just do like an Amazon wish list.
Yeah. Tori was talking about his Amazon wish list that I think he needs to share with all of us.
I send it to everybody whenever it's my birthday because there's things I want.
I just
Jen and Brenda both get really good gifts though. They're both like really like intuitive, I feel like, and are like, I feel like they always get me like the perfect gifts.
That's very kind of you, but I am not in anywhere near Jen's league. Jen is a fantastic gift giver because it's not just one thing, right? There's a whole theme around the way that she gives gifts, right? So while I may get one cool thing, Jen creates a whole production, right? Like Jen is queen when it comes to gift giving. Absolute queen.
And then like the luck she gets in the like random grab and goes. Like she got me this grab and go, and I think it was from like Hot Topic. It was for Digimon, and out comes freaking Palmon, and I'm like, my Digimon! Like, how did you make this happen? It's just like.
That is true. I like that theme that year. I think. Well, I used to do like themes for Christmas, and I think I let that go like maybe a year ago. But I one year was like blankets according to fandom, and then one year was.
I still have my Pokemon one.
Here, well, you also still have your blankets.
Excuse me.
Yay!
My Lion King one.
This one is so soft too. My cats have stolen it from me actually. Like I'm holding it right now and my cat is right here. Like, why do you take my blanket?
So my dog stole mine, so
yeah.
They're so soft too.
Yay. Well, I'm really happy that you guys also, went ahead and like shared another share and tell for
Oh.
and that you enjoyed the present. That makes me happy is whenever I able to like get something that you really love. Well, anyways, that was a long detour. Clearly, we've all lost our minds a little bit. I think we're just,
What's time anymore?
I totally
What's a schedule?
I totally forgot that I had been watching Encounter this week too, but it shows you how very little grasp of time I have.
Yeah, same. I mean, I finished Mystic Pop-Up Bar, which is also a good one. But yeah, what is time? We're in Quarantime with Brennifry.
Mm-hmm.
So this week we are continuing our coverage and our, as best we can with everything that is available to us, and both our watching histories and our reading histories and literacy histories. We are continuing our coverage of Pride Month, and our today is Young Justice Outsiders. So Young Justice is a alternate universe where that follows the proteges of the main Justice League. Is that fair to say, right? Like,
Yeah.
we follow the proteges of the main Justice League and their adventures as a team. And every season takes a time jump. So season 1 starts them off really young, season 2 is a time jump, and then season 3 is also a time jump. But we're still following the main cast, but we do get interchangeable characters every season. So in season 3, the thing about season 3 was it came back after being off the air for a couple of years.
Wow, like what, 8 years?
Yeah, it was a couple.
8,
I don't
7?
know. I don't think it was 8 years, but it was a long time. But apparently, it wasn't doing so well in the merchandising. That's one of the reasons. But fans really loved the series enough, and it was rebooted in conjunction with the launch of the DC Universe app. Mm-hmm. And so we pick up years later with our heroes, older, handling different mantles, and we get introduced to a wealth of new characters. So, and one of the characters that we're going to highlight is a character named Halo, or Violet. I think Halo's her alias
name, yeah.
Superhero name, and Violet is her identity as a civilian. So I'm going to start us off like I always do. What were first impressions? Like, what did you think of the show now that it came back? What was your impression of the show before and then when it came back?
Sorry, so I just want to add, I looked it up while you guys were talking. So Young Justice was officially off the air for 6 years. Okay. It went off the air in 2013 and it came back in 2019. So about 6 years off the air. Do you want to start, Tor, or should I go?
Sure, yeah, I'd be more than happy to. So first impressions of Young Justice, my husband was going through, he knows I love superheroes and everything superhero. And one day, I think I was in, God, this was so long ago. I was, I don't know, maybe a junior in college. I came home from school one day, long day of school, writing papers, etc. And he's like, oh, I found this show on Cartoon Network. Like, I was just looking up superhero stuff because I know you like it. Let's give it a try. And I was like, okay. And so the first Saturday kind of rolled around and we watched it. And I was like, oh my God, this is so good. I was like instantly hooked. Went on to loving all of season 1, loving all of season 2, could not get enough of it. I have a sister who's like 18-ish years younger than me. And so I started watching it with her. And she was all obsessed with it, especially once it switched to the DC app. I was showing my password and letting her watch it. But, it was great. I think for me, I talk about it a lot in my class in terms of audience and audience awareness, because I think Young Justice was such a good example of getting the audience wrong, but having a fantastic product, because I feel that they intended Young Justice to be marketed to little boys, like ages, 6 to 12 or whatever, and it just didn't land with them. It landed with older nerds and surprisingly little girls in that same age group were really into it. I think it's because Artemis was so cool and Wonder Girl was so cool, right? She's always flexing and punching and like just being cool. And I think, you know, Miss Martian, as much as I don't like her, my sister loved her, right? I think we just got these female characters that were getting the spotlight and keeping up with the boys. And I think that said something to kind of the audience that Cartoon Network wasn't expecting. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, I don't even know how I got into Young Justice. It must have been Jen who recommended it, or maybe Tori recommended it to us both, and then we just started watching it. But I agree with you, Tori. I think this is one of those shows that's definitely building on the legacy that shows like Justice League and Unlimited and Justice League the animated series set up, right? Well, and to give credit, you know, Batman the animated series and the Superman animated series, right? Like all of them, I feel like Justice League is their, like, not sequel, but it's holding that legacy, right? Because I feel like the people who enjoyed those original shows are the same people who are enjoying Young Justice, right? The first season of Young Justice is one of those shows that is really interesting for me to watch because I always gravitate to the female characters. And I don't mean that because I'm a girl. It's just typically who I've gravitated to, right? In series, I guess it is because I'm a girl. I don't know. I don't know. But that's probably something I need to unpack and figure out on my own. But with Young Justice, I had the same reaction to Megan that you had, Tori. I didn't like her, but I enjoyed watching her, right?
I
Because
adore
she
Artemis,
was,
though.
yes, I adore
Oh,
Artemis.
love Artemis. Oh, best character.
But yes, absolutely. But these are characters that would not problematic, sorry. They were confronting real issues, right? And choices that Megan would make, I could see myself making those choices. And so it was more like, oh, damn it, Megan, why are you making those choices? Be better, right? And so while I didn't love her, I did understand why she existed, right? And I appreciated that she was on screen, right? Then you had characters like Connor who, oh my God, he was so frustrating and angering.
But damn, does he grow.
Right, well, all of them do it. And I love every single character on here because you have Aqualad, right, who is this hesitant leader. And he's not a hesitant leader necessarily. He's just a natural one. Yes. Oh my goodness, Calder. Okay. So you start off with like, oh yeah, you know what? Dick is obviously going to be the leader because, you know, Teen Titans and all this shit, right? And then no, he's not the more mature leader there. He's not the natural pick. It's Calder, right? And so I really enjoy watching him, right, be center stage and take on that mantle. So when season 2 came around and then Outsiders came around, I was a little resentful of the fact that we didn't get more of him, like front and center, right? He was still there, but I really didn't like that we kind of lost touch with the original Young Justice cast, right? We started instead centering other characters who were interesting, but I missed my original, right? Like the ones from season 1. But I think that happens, right? Cast gets bigger, and so you want to tell different stories, and you don't want to focus in on the same characters. So I understand it, and I'm also frustrated by it, right? But best believe that when season 4 comes around, I'll still be watching because I really enjoyed.
I think that's one of the banes.
Yeah,
and I think that's one of the banes of Young Justice is the cast gets very large very quickly, and they try really hard to be as equitable as possible with time, which means you get a whole bunch of people who don't get much time at all because everybody's kind of, for the most part, getting a fair turn on the teeter-totter. But yeah, and I think that really plays into kind of some of the queer identities even that we'll be talking about today too, where they're kind of short, not lived, but like it's like, boom, this person's queer, okay, moving on to the next character, because it's like everybody's trying to get their turn on the spinning teacups at Disneyland.
Well, and it's interesting, right? Because the cast keeps getting bigger, but the themes also get bigger, right? And darker just by nature of the storylines. And so while you do, I mean, I think as originally conceived, it was for a younger audience, some of the themes that show up in here and are very complex, right? You're dealing with political structures that are inhibiting different sectors of society, right? And so typically children's programming is very who's the evil guy, who's the bad guy, and who's the good guy, right? So it's very black and white and easy to figure out. With Young Justice, there's a lot of gray, and when you see leaders who are corrupt working within systems that are designed to really disenfranchise people, it's really interesting, and the water gets really muddy, right? You don't actually know who to root for sometimes, and sometimes the person that you're actually rooting for ends up being the villain. And so I don't know, it creates a very interesting narrative, but it's much more complex than the typical children's narrative.
Yeah, and I think too, because even the Young Justice kids function very much in the gray. Like they're doing the jobs, the it's not supers, but the pro heroes, I don't know what we're calling them. Stuff Superman can't get away with. They're doing these covert, like things that are a little questionable at times because the other ones need to save face. Like we can't have Wonder Woman going up and blowing up Lex Luthor's corporation. But if it's a team of untrained sidekicks, like, oops, they messed up. Like, if they get caught, right? So there's a lot of gray, and I did really enjoy that. And I think that one of the big ones for me is Artemis and her whole backstory, like a child of villains, and her mom works a deal with, I think, Batman or Green Arrow to be like, my daughter needs to be put on the straight and narrow. Please, I am begging you, don't let her become a villain. Please, like, train her and get her, it was Green Arrow, train her and help her not be a villain. And I just thought that was, and that's in like season 1. And then she hides it because she's afraid that she'll be rejected by her friends if they find out that her mom is Huntress and her dad is Sportsmaster. And her sister is Cheshire.
Yeah, that's one of the things that are really, picking up on what you guys have said. Like what I enjoyed about the show was that gray, right? And I know Tori was like, oh, like they made a mistake, they're young. But even that, putting a young team out there to take a hit like that is very questionable, right?
Yeah.
And I think
more questionable, especially coming from when these decisions are made by characters like Superman and Wonder Woman.
And Wonder Woman.
Actually, I can see Batman making that choice, right?
Right.
But
like
the
Batman
other two
makes that choice. Like Batman is very like, and you see Batman being Batman. You see Batman's influence on this team, right? Because he's one of the ones that says like, let's do it, right? But yeah, it does call into question like Kal-El's, Clark's, Diana's kind of ethos here, right? I mean, nowadays Diana is seen as a warrior and one with the warrior code, and so she makes these questionable decisions all under the umbrella and framework of being a warrior, right? So I think we can we can see that a little bit more of her, but definitely like with Kal-El, you don't really see that, right? He is that upstanding model, and so to have him, and he's not necessarily put in the best light either because he has such a fractured, interesting relationship with Connell.
Yes, right? That's what I was about to bring up.
Like here's Connell, a clone of and child of Lex and Clark, right? And and he has both an urge to embrace and reject him. And
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, he has an urge to embrace and reject him because, he is part Lex. And so you see, while we don't get a lot of episodes on that focus, you do see the effects of Kal-El's rejection of Connell. Like, whereas, like, it takes forever for Connell to really get over his anger, get over his inferiority complex, and be okay with this identity, right? And you really don't get a resolution to that until maybe season 3 when Connor comes out as, I am the child of both Superman and Lex. I am a clone. I am a Geno something.
Genomorph?
Genomorph, yes.
Is that the word? I couldn't remember.
but he's, you know, he comes out as a public hero, right? So you see that kind of trajectory, but it takes 3 seasons to get there, right? And so that's what I really enjoy about the series, is that while it is great, it is, you know, it's allowed to make these questionable kind of moves and actions and story points, but the character development is really rich, and that's one of the reasons I really enjoy the show, because, you know, I love the Bat family, but I really have enjoyed, you know, Dick's journey from being the sidekick to being Robin to being this kind of like playful guy to being Nightwing, who makes questionable choices like his mentor Batman, and, you know, seeing that conflict there.
Well, and Nightwing is so fascinating because while you understand that Batman makes the choices that he makes because he's tortured and because he's seen the dark side, Dick is happier. Dick moved on. Dick learned and he could have the American dream, right? For all intents and purposes, he's a white male with all the privileges that life has to offer, and yet he still opts for those questionable choices. So it's one of the reasons whenever I do pick up Grace in the comic book or the graphic novel, I'm so fascinated by his character, because while it makes sense, it's also something that's always at tension with his identity, right? But anyway, we're not talking about that, Nightwing. That'll be a conversation for another day.
Was it?
But I think.
Oh, I was gonna say, was it Young Justice 3 or was it Super Sons that did that scene where they Clark and Connor go to visit Daddy Superman? Can't think of his name all of a sudden. Papa Kent. And then he just like hugs both of them and he's like, I'm so happy to have both my boys here, or all my boys here, or something like that. And it might have been in Super Sons. The more I think about it, I think it's Super Sons. But
I remember the thing you're talking about, but I also don't remember which one it was, because I feel like
John was there too now, the more I think about it. So I think it's Super Sons, but I really freaking love that scene.
But I do want to go back to, I don't remember Tori, I really do, and now I'm gonna have to go
totally.
and look at it. But to your point, Jen, I think one of the things that you touched on was the fact that the character arcs are well taken care of, right? And so one of the things that's so frustrating with Connell is that he's such a teenager, right? But he's the stereotype angry teenager, right? Who has to learn slowly, but then once he matures, you start seeing like all the patience that his friends have had with him, that his mentors have had with him, but also the patience that he has had with himself. And it's something that he's had to learn, right? And so I think in showing that, it highlights some elements of mental health that I think are really important, right? Because Connor's journey of mental health is so long, right? And it's continuous. It's a process that takes forever. And it's a process that never ends, right? Because having to take care of that anger and that frustration takes work, and it's work that has to continue into his adulthood. Oh, sorry, I got excited and I hit my computer. But it has to continuously be something that is always a presence, and it's a part of his identity, right? The Lex identity part of him is never going to go away, and it's always there, right? And so that's one of the things that I do think that they did well with. Or is that sentence correct?
Sure. Quarantine.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think, you know, picking up on that note and maybe extending just the conversation a little bit, every one of the team, because that's how they're referred to on the show, the team. They're not giving an official title like Teen Titans or, you know, even Young Justice. They're just referred to as a team. You know, every member of that main team that we start off in season 1, you know, makes questionable choices that are actually dealt with. The consequences are dealt with. And so, like, you know, if you're new to the show, we're going to have some spoilers because we can't, you know, help it. But like when Calder decides to go undercover, he has to play the part of the bad guy, right? Because he's Black Manta's son. And so he ends up joining that side. So he has to end up playing the part of the bad guy, but that means going up against his friends, right? His former allies. And former allies that don't know who don't know what's going on. So you have, like, as a result, Megan mind wiping him out of anger because she thinks that Calder killed Artemis. And so again, you have these young heroes dealing with the consequences of their choices and their power sets, right? Like, I don't love Megan either. Like, she's super annoying. But I will, say that it's an interesting kind of journey to see her contend with her mental powers and how powerful that is. Because she comes into the show being very happy-go-lucky, like, I'm super cute and like
Hello, Megan.
Right. And then the way that she handles her powers is in a very frivolous way. And as she gains more authority and more, maturity, like, she starts making these decisions about her powers, right?
Starts breaking brains.
Right. And she starts saying it's okay, like, for an episode, like, for a couple of episodes, I had to mind wipe. I had to do this. This is for the greater good. And so she ends up doing the same thing to Calder, except, in that she finds out Calder wasn't really undercover. So she ends up hurting a person that she loves because of the I had to. The ends justifies the means kind of, ideology that she had adopted. And
then Connor rejects her for it. He's like, you've gone too far. Like.
Right. And so
you see there how dangerous having these powers is, right? And how dangerous absolute power can become, especially when it's unchecked. Because when Connor does try to check her, we all know what happens, right? And it doesn't. She then just kind of blows up and becomes a version of herself that neither the audience nor even Megan are happy with, or Megan, sorry.
Yeah. And you see those kind of, like, choices happening across the board with the main team members, right? You see them being these individuals who are young and don't know any better, or trying to make a name for themselves. And then you see them grow into the mentors to young heroes themselves, and how hard mentorship is, right? And so you start to see that they themselves start to recognize that maybe their mentors weren't all wrong, and that they were human, like they had a humanity, and they were capable of, like, error as well, because they're committing errors with their mentees.
Right.
And so I think it was really groundbreaking for an animated show like this, in the same way that Korra had the same, effect, to go there with these characters on an animated level.
And be punished for it by the network.
Right. And so I really appreciate a series like this because it went there, because it showed us consequences to superheroism, and to,
like, Wally,
that consequences could lead to death and to violence, right? Because I think we're still all, like, heartbroken over Wally.
When season 3 came back and they had the dog holding the plushie of him, I lost it. Like,
I cannot believe you just brought that up without even warning us. I am not. That happened in 2013. Oh my God, I'm tearing up. Oh God. I know, this is ridiculous. I'm sorry.
It's a hard death. Like, it is a hard death to process, because it's just the superhero job. Like, it's.
I'm not ashamed to admit that every episode of Young Justice I was waiting for, is this when they're going to bring back Wally? Is this going to be the episode?
And they refuse. They want us to deal with the consequences.
I mean, and you see the fallout of that with Artemis, and Artemis and Wally become a couple. Like, you see the fallout, like how Artemis deals with grief, and what does life look like for her post Wally, right? And it's one of those things where she's like, I need to abandon this mantle of Artemis and go and take on this mantle of Tigress, because Artemis was Wally's thing, right? And I need to forge a new identity that allows me the space to breathe without him, and that's Tigress right now. And so even that, I think was so powerful to show. And I think it's one of those.
So beautifully done.
Huh?
You said it so beautifully, yeah. All of that.
And one of my most favorite Artemis scenes is where she is basically outed at the there's like Thanksgiving or Christmas table. Her mom is there. Her mom is paralyzed from being hurt being a villain, or in a wheelchair rather. And she snaps on Artemis, right? She is an immigrant, and she's like, how dare you? You said you were done with this. Like, you are going to get her out there as Tigress. Look at what happened to Wally. Look at what happened to your friend Barbara. Like, look what happened to me. Like, this is what this life holds for you. And she's like, I just want you to get out of this cycle. And it was like, oh, so good.
Right. And I think, and I want to talk about a little bit about this, but, my question to you guys is, how do you feel the move to a streaming platform helped the show or didn't help the show? What did you like or didn't like about that? For me, I felt like it allowed them to go deeper into like darker stories. I don't know if it was necessarily successful all the time, but I did appreciate that like deeper dive, right?
I think the plot definitely got slower, right? And that slow pacing allowed for it to be a little bit more in depth in terms of character arcs. What ended up happening is though that some of the plot felt drawn out, because even with the streaming service, right, one of the things that we enjoy about streaming is the binge part of it, right? The fact that you can enjoy it now, right? And so first of all, we had to wait for it initially for 6 years, right? And then we had to wait for one half only, and we had 1 or 2 episodes a week.
One episode. It started with 3 initially, then I think it was 1 a week or something like that.
And every single episode was really slow. So I think pacing wise, it actually hurt it.
Yeah.
In terms, I mean, there were moments where I was a little bored by Outsiders in a way that I never felt with Young Justice. While I was always angry at some of the choices the characters are making with Young Justice, I felt like the pacing for Outsiders was definitely glacial. In comparison, but I also think that some of the plot points would not be possible had they not slowed down the way that they did.
Yeah, I think that the streaming kind of genre has allowed for them to play the long game that they weren't allowed to play on network, because the way season 3 ends, like branching to season 4, I'm like, oh, here's the actual season 3 we're gonna get now. Like, it's like they had to do this, like, let's catch everyone up to speed and let's start processing all this trauma that we left you with from season 2. Like, because I feel like they kind of did something a little bit on the meta side, because like, Artemis still hasn't processed Wally, the team still hasn't processed Wally, we as the audience still haven't processed Wally, and then they time skipped, so I think that part of it was a lot of that too, like helping people recover, because for those that didn't watch, season 2 like ends with like Wally dying, and then you're just kind of 6 years of nothing, and you're like, what?
I agree. Like, I think you have obviously the fucking heartbreaking tease of Bruce Lee, I think that's the dog's name, holding a little Wally plush and Kid Flash plush, right? But
waiting for him to walk through the front door.
Yeah, but you also have like Artemis dealing with that like throughout, right? And then also you have an episode where Dick is just like, I think he's like still sick, recovering after the effect, sick, and he's recovering after the effects of something, and he like imagines himself as younger with Wally trying to figure his way out of a situation through like video gaming.
Yeah.
But it's a mindscape or it's a dreamscape that everyone is a part of. And so that you finally see like everyone finally understands like Dick has not processed this yet.
Yeah, he like got
and it reminds the audience that you haven't processed it either, because I remember that episode and I remember
I cried so much.
Mind you, this was during like, okay, so all right, so a little time, I was watching this at work during my break, right? because I had a 30-minute lunch. So I took my iPad and I was watching it while I was eating my lunch. And I just started crying. And I remember texting Jen and Tori, like, what even is this? And they're like, oh, yeah, we told you that this is going to happen. I'm like, I don't remember you telling me I was going to be crying. But anyway, I can be.
Yeah, I think because Dick was sick, but they were all mind linked from Magan because they were doing a mission together. And then he like has this like fever dream mid-mission as he's hacking, and it's because he can't figure it out. And then Wally helps him in his fever dream.
And you see Wally really being mentioned too, right? Like there's that episode where Garfield is also being like mind controlled, and so he has like this space Star Trek kind of acty episode where Wally is like part of his command deck, and you get another reference to Wally, right? And so you know, they really are just kind of pushing that Wally agenda and saying, oh yeah, he died, remember that?
Yeah, and these kids these other people haven't processed it either because the mission comes first, and they just keep shoving it down.
It's that kind of important commentary on loss, right? Even if you process loss, it's still a loss that's ever present, right? Because even if they get, because I don't even want to say get over it, because you can't. That's not something, like, that's not how death works. That's not how moving on works, right? It's not something you get over. It's something that you learn to live with, right? But having to learn to live with it is also something that you can be fine one day, and then grief will hit you when you least expect it. It'll be you're recovering from like this battle that had nothing to do with Wally, right? But you're recovering, and in your recovery, you finally have a moment to kind of look at yourself and realize, fuck, I'm not okay. And I think that's one of the things that ends up happening, just not just to the characters on screen, but to the audience as well, which is one of the things that I think Young Justice Outsiders does really well, right? Reminding that audience and bringing the audience back to the fact that whatever these characters are living through, you're living through it with them, right? And because they did slow down, you start to care and invest in the characters in the way that you might not have otherwise. And I think that's something that is one of the hallmarks of the show for sure.
Right. And I think, like, you know, some of the things that I enjoyed that is a direct result of being on the streaming platform was that you got some more grit and darker scenes from the show. So you see Ocean Master plotting revenge against the heroes by going after the children of these superheroes. So you have like the children of like young Arthur, you have a baby John, you have all these like children, right? Cheshire's Child, Will, etc. Like they're all on this like play date, which is actually really nice, and it's actually a nice episode to see like these women and these parent characters, right? Not just women, but like these parent characters having a community for themselves, because
the non-super haves,
right? That because no one else would understand the life like they do, right? And it's kind of nice. But then you see like, oh yeah, because they are the children of supers or the spouses of supers, or they're targets, they're vulnerable targets, and you see Ocean Master going after them, and then the light actually says, no, this is a line, this is a nuclear option, we're not crossing this for your petty revenge, and kills him. You literally see the light representative chop his head off, which you would not have seen on broadcast.
Never on Cartoon Network. Never.
You probably wouldn't have an episode that's kind of has a tension of what's going to happen to these children who are in these vulnerable positions.
Babies.
Right. We wouldn't have gotten that conversation, right? And so that's one of the things that I enjoyed.
One of your favorite topics, and I'm sorry, not to put you on the spot, Jen, but I think one of the things that you continuously bring up, that you remind us, and I think is a good thing. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. I got a call on my phone and I forgot it's connected to my computer. But I think one of the things that you continuously bring up is the fact that when we're watching superhero stories, right, we're often seeing children, right? And we forget that they are children. These are teenagers, right? When we talked about Miss Marvel, you're always like, yeah, she's a 16-year-old girl, right? Spider-Man is also a 16-year-old boy, right? Like, we're always continuously looking at that. And one of the things that Young Justice does is always center on the fact that these are people who are trying to prove themselves, right? And because they're superheroes, it's okay for us to demand more of them, right? And for us to expect like that. Almost, I'm not saying that that's actually what happens, right? But I'm saying like that is almost the expectation that occurs, right? Because they're superheroes, we can demand more of them. And so you see that parallel between the demands that society places on teenagers of color and superheroes, right? So you see that parallel there. And I think when you look at people like Aqualad, right? When you look at people like Violet and the kinds of trauma that they encounter on just the job, right? And you have to, I think one of the things that Young Justice does is it shows you how difficult and unfair it is to have these expectations of these people, right? Because they are so young. They have so little life experience, and yet they've lived and experienced much more life than the average person. And that's intense and that's unfair. And they're not given the luxury or the privilege of a childhood, of a young life, or even the privilege of allowing them to make mistakes. Because when they make mistakes, unfortunately, the consequences are so much deeper, bigger, so much more messed up, if that makes sense.
I think you said it really well. I think, we tend to put superheroes on this pedestal because, by nature, that's what, that's where they exist. But I don't think enough conversations had around the fact that we have very young superheroes, and what does that mean for them, right? What is, in the same way that we don't talk about, PTSD for superheroes, in the same way that we don't talk about that, we also don't talk about what that means. What does, trauma mean for a young individual? What does that look like for a young superhero, and what does mental health look like for them? And that's, I think, a conversation point that needs to always be talked about, right? Which is what I enjoy about Young Justice for that reason, is that it is talked about. Like, maybe it's not completely talked about, but it is talked about and referenced enough in the show in a way that it's not in other shows about superheroes, where the focus is more on hijinks or more on the action of things, right? So right. I feel like Young Justice is complete in that sense, that it gives us really great action sequences, right? It's one of the best, and it also gives us really good story, but also character development.
Absolutely.
But, I think Brenda did a nice little segue for us in terms of like talking about Halo and Aqualad, because we do in season 3, there's a lot to talk about. I think there's a lot to talk about because we've been talking about this for a very long time, right? But, while I don't necessarily like the infusion of like 300 different teams on Justice season 3 Outsiders, we do have opportunities for characters to come in that represent different groups. And we also have further exploration of certain characters in different arenas of their lives, right? And 2 of those characters for us, but our main focus will be on just one, are Halo and Aqualad, right? And in season 3, we have Halo, who is an otherworldly being that inhabits the body of a young Muslim girl. But midway through season 3, she ends up coming out as non-binary, I would venture to say. And in season 3, you also get, I think, confirmation that Calder is bisexual.
There's an on-screen kiss for sure.
Yeah. And so, I wanted to just, for those who are watching this blog, Halo is the one who's at the center of this picture. She's the one within the cloak and purple highlight. So let's talk a little bit about Halo and, maybe even a little bit about Calder and how we felt about that.
So when Halo got introduced, when I first saw the character, I was like, wow, this is really progressive. I'm like excited for this. I'm curious to see, Miss Marvel was such a success as, like a young Pakistani Muslim superhero. I was curious to see what they would do with Halo. And then like her plot point, rather her powers, kept being her just kind of dying over and over, and that really bothered me. And then I felt that kind of out of nowhere, they put a hard no on female pronouns and was like, I'm non-binary, I'm a mother box. And I was like, okay, I respect that. But this was also phrased with, also I'm not Muslim, also I'm not Middle Eastern, also or I'm not all of these things, right? So I was kind of like, okay. It just, for me, it felt like a lot kind of thrown at me all of a sudden. They were kind of like, I'm not this, I'm not that, but I was like, well, then why are you still wearing a hijab? And why are you like doing all these things, right? But I mean, like, if that's the story they're going to tell, I obviously respect and appreciate. I mean, I think non-binary awareness and representation is so important, but I don't know if they chose the appropriate character for it, if that makes sense.
No, they did not.
Yeah.
To answer your question, they didn't.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a lot of, sorry. I'm sorry, Tori, it's to dismiss what you're saying. Sorry, it's just my response.
You know what? Go for it.
Yeah, go for it.
I have a lot of problems with the character. For one, here you have a wonderful opportunity for a Muslim representation.
Mm-hmm.
And the character, right? The original character, her name was Gabrielle, I believe.
Yes, Gabrielle was the human source.
So that is her body. That is literally her body. Mm-hmm. And she is killed and another essence takes over, right? So here you are essentially an alien, right? Okay, so
it just keeps, the snowball keeps getting bigger.
It just gets more and more problematic, right? I'm sorry for okay. So you have an alien entity take over her body and then use her body against the will of the original owner, right? Because the original owner is dead, right? Mm-hmm. But literally the lack of body autonomy that this character, or at least now this shell has, is so messed up, especially when you look at the legacy of bodies of color having to undergo and endure trauma, right? And so now you have this character going through that. And that's only the first part of it, right? Because we haven't gotten there yet. This is just the beginning idea of the concept of this character. And then this character has no memory, right? And so a lot of it becomes she's this mystery that we have to solve, right? Mm-hmm. So she's not even a person. She is a thing that we have to figure out and understand, right? Like that is the concept within the structure of the show. And that is not only wrong, but frustrating and so problematic. And that really bothered me. It's very similar to anyone who watches Doctor Who, like Clara, right? Clara became this mystery that the Doctor had to solve, right? It didn't even matter who she was. It didn't matter what she did. Her personality was secondary, right? Mm-hmm. She's a mystery that we have to solve. And the same kind of thing happened with Halo. Now, at least with Halo, they gave her a little bit more justice in the sense that you actually got to know her personality and you got to at least see a little bit of her, right? But it's not actually Gabrielle who you're learning about. It's not right. Gabrielle who you are meeting. It's Violet, and Violet is this alien entity who has taken over the body of this young girl of color. And she has these wonderful, awesome powers, and that's great. And then eventually you learn that she's non-binary. She identifies as Mother Box, right? Which is gendered, but then she says she's non-binary, right? So that's even in terms of our language, right? I think at least there's something to be said about how language evolves and how messy that evolution is, right? Because we all often have these words that we use, but we use them carelessly, right? And eventually we get enough sense to learn, okay, we need to use the appropriate terminology. But I think with Halo, once she comes out as non-binary, it feels like it's out of the blue, right? We've had all of this character development. We've learned a little bit about her, or at least the entity inside of Gabrielle's body. And then suddenly, oh, I'm non-binary out of nowhere. And I don't know enough about the non-binary community to say that that's how it works, right? I can't speak to that. But as a viewer, it just seemed like it came out of the blue, right? It was just a term that she chose one day because it sounded cool, and that bothered me, right?
They were kind of leading the character Violet into before we knew they were non-binary, or non-binary adjacent, however we're going to, because I don't believe Violet ever says they are specifically non-binary, rather they are not male or female. I believe
right, you're right.
Exact
so
terminology.
This entire time we've been using she as a pronoun, right? And then once we see,
even Violet was using she as a pronoun, right? Like in the show.
Exactly. So from there we start calling her, they, them instead, right? And so that is the appropriate terminology. But this entire time we've been working under the assumption of Gabrielle, right? But then she actually rejects that and she says, no, I'm Violet, right? And so we stick to Violet and then we move on to they, which, you know what, it takes a long time for us to adopt the appropriate terminology, right? And it does take time and patience from both the character and the audience. So I think that's a good conversation to have. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and what I think too, because this is the non-binary aspect gets thrusted in amidst an episode where, when we are thinking at the time cisgendered straight Violet is starting to explore their sexuality. They, I believe, kiss a girl from school. They're kind of breaking rules and being bad, and they're definitely experimenting. And so in that moment I was like, oh, they're going to go a bisexual route, or even a lesbian route, like coming out and being like, actually,
the character evolution makes a lot of sense. Like when they're there, right? The thing that really bothers me is the excuse me, the undertones of violence, right? That this non-binary character can only exist as a result of this violent act committed against this young girl of color, right? And so then that becomes problematic because you have these two disenfranchised communities essentially pitted against each other, and that really bothers me, right? I like the idea of non-binary representation. I think that the way that it was handled in this particular series is problematic, particularly because of the way that it is placed with Gabrielle's initial conception.
And I think there's something incredibly problematic about Violet's revival powers, which they use very often. Violet is killed gruesomely in almost every single action scene, and then Wumbo Jumbo fixes, and I'm like, you just like snapped their neck, you just impaled them, you just set them on fire. Like, it really like bothers me that they get killed on screen horribly, and then just boom, 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 special light turned on and I'm fixed. Like, really bothers me.
I think a lot of Violet's characterization is bothersome, right? Which is interesting that we're having this conversation, because at the time when this, I think, what was it, like episode 14, I think that's probably the episode that we have this conversation of non-binary, right? Neither she nor he, right, doesn't identify. But, at the time, a lot of articles are coming out saying, like, the show did a really good job at treating that. So it's really interesting that we're having this conversation in conjunction with those, reviewers that said, like, that non-binary representation was handled really well, right? I think that, like, and this falls under a lot of our previous conversations with America. So if you haven't, seen that yet, go check out Brenda's presentation on America.
I don't think I ever posted it.
we will post it soon. But, you know, I
It's on
think
the blog.
what's problematic about, you know, for me about Violet is one, and this brought up in our conversation with Tori, was, you know, one, not Muslim, so why wearing a hijab, right? That's something that I didn't even know.
Costume at that point. Like,
Right. And so Tori brought that up. And two, like, you're an alien that is coming from an alien culture that is
all mother boxes.
that is by, you know, that is dual, like it's by, you know, it's dual in nature, in a sense that, like, it's very gendered. It's mother box or father box. And so how do you know, even in their kind of mentality, in their framework, they refer to themselves as mother box, which is an incredibly gendered term and phrasing, right?
Right.
And so a lot of times, like, creators don't know how to, like, they're trying to be progressive, but they're also using the same binaries that are very human. Culture.
Violet should have been like, I'm not mother box or father box, I'm just box. Like, is like the step they should have taken, in my opinion, to adhere to this alien race's idea of gender and then what non-binary is.
Within that race, right? And I feel like other creators don't actually do a really good job of, like, incorporating alien races into human norms and rules and boundaries, right?
Well, that's exclusively what they do, right? They gender everything, right? And so to have a character like Halo it's a wonderful opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. And then every single step that they take feels very, I don't know. I remember when we were first watching it and we were reading the responses from reviewers, and I remember feeling like, am I watching a different show, or am I wrong? I must be wrong, because if everyone likes it, why do I not, right? And so that was my reaction as a viewer. And I remember when we first started talking about it, I listened to you guys a lot, because I'm like, I still need to work my feelings out through this, because I don't think I totally understand how I feel about this character. Because to watch Halo continuously be killed, that was bad, right? I'm sorry, I lack the terminology to say how
disturbing it is,
frustrating and ugly it was, right? Because this is one of those characters who's experienced trauma throughout their entire life, and then to have this character continuously experience that. And there was one where it was I think they were shot and their body was dumped into a grave. Was that the first time that they were killed? Or
that's when Gabrielle is killed.
Okay. Yeah, that one was awful. And then the other ones are just as bad, if not worse, right?
Yeah. And then Violet goes and visits Gabrielle's parents later, and it's like awful too. Because they're like, I know it's your daughter's body, but like, sorry. Just know that they're dead. And there's basically what.
Right. And there is no sensitive way that they approach that culture and the cultural norms of what death means within the Muslim community, right? And what it means for the, you know, that aside,
the burial practices.
Right. Well, and it became just another way that Black and brown bodies are brutalized, right? And to have that be a continuous thing, I could not get past that. So when when they were exploring Violet's sexuality, that was still in the back of my mind, right? Like all of these things that are happening, and it's messy, right? Everything is messy, including the trauma that's been happening, right? But at the same time, this almost flippant disregard for life, that really bothered me, you guys. I don't think I don't know, I'm still not over it.
No, I think they could have chosen another character to explore that was non-binary, right? To explore what that was human, to explore what that terminology, what that, sense of self means. within the human world. And I feel like a lot of times, like, queer representation is takes place with an alien.
Yes, 1000%. Always.
Right? Like, even with Calder, right? Like, Calder is Atlantean.
Yeah, he's not even really black if you really want to get air quotes, right? If you really want to get technical, like, he's Atlantean.
Right.
Like,
right. And so he has a different, like, just like Wonder Woman, right? Just like Diana. Diana's Themyscirian. Like, they live in cultures and societies that
aren't ours.
Operate on very different levels than what our first world society is, right? And so I feel like a lot of queer representations, for whatever reason, starts with the alien realm. And it's like, one, you're already othering them by making them an alien. We shouldn't be doing that. If we're talking about inclusivity and inclusivity, you're already othering them by putting them in an alien position, right? And you're treating them as foreign. But, also, like, they're alien, and so our rules and our frame of thoughts and ideologies and perspectives don't necessarily mean the same thing to them, because they're coming from different societies and different worlds where concepts of gender and concepts of self are different. By virtue of being a different world.
It's like making foragers binary. If they did that, like, gender isn't a thing for foragers community. Like, they're just forager.
So, but I think this is actually a problem of white lens fiction, specifically science fiction, right? Because in science fiction, the alien is always the other, right? So it becomes a way to say, oh, when we're looking at fiction, science fiction as like this colonist perspective, right? It's always going to be the minority character, right? Who, I mean, just look at all the characters that Zoe Saldana ends up playing, right? She's always the green character or the blue character, right? Like, she's the extreme alien, right? So it's not just something about, it's not just the sexuality is othered, right? Minority characters are always othered. And that's a problem, right? But I think that comes back to the creators of the show who are building on this legacy of this white lens, right? To say that the white supremacy isn't embedded in somehow in the conception of science fiction is a fallacy. It totally is, right? And so that's what actually ends up happening. You end up getting these characters like Halo who are built to endure every single type of trauma, and it is okay in the space of the story, because you know what, they're the other, they can handle it, right? And it is an unfair expectation to place on one single character. And that, and that's why I brought up the my earlier comment about what we expect of younger heroes, right? And all of the things that are thrust on them and how messed up it is that is our fiction. Literally, this is a story that is meant for younger audiences. And what we're telling younger audiences is, if you see a young character of color who also doesn't identify with our gender norms, then it's okay to put them through trauma. And that's a messed up message to send to youth. And that's one of the reasons why Halo frustrates me so much as a character. And while I am happy for queer representation that isn't just gay or bi, right? That is beyond, that also represents trans community, the trans community and the non-binary community. This kind of representation, because there isn't a lot of it, is clumsy at best. And it can be dangerous as well. And that's one of the things that really bothers me with Halo.
I think similar to Cora, the glass ceiling has been shattered now, and hopefully this means future work can flourish in that space.
I hope so, right? Because that's one of the things, right? One of the reasons why I demand and I want better from our fiction writers, because when you have a clumsy representation like this, and it's one of the few representations,
I think the only,
then it becomes that only one, right? And then what it can easily end up happening is that the next one's going to follow this pattern, and this pattern wasn't a good pattern, and then you start replicating that story. And that's not good,
And
guys. That's just not good.
And I think you're bringing up a lot of great points, right? The white lens, especially get like terminology, right? The imperialist, colonial kind of underpinnings of science fiction is a great point as well. And the idea of this as being a clumsy representation, I would argue, like, I don't even know if this is even representation, right? Because
yeah, there's always that too. Like,
right, representation of what? She's not.
right.
They're not Muslim, right? So why are they wearing the
And they're
hijab, like
not
Tori said, right?
held to human gender
They are.
standards.
But if you're a child and you're looking at Halo, right?
Yeah.
What are you looking at?
Right. And so, like,
sorry, not
like
at,
we're seeing shells of representation of what people think what representation means, right? And it's not fair representation in that regard. And I'm wondering if, the problem here is that, the creators are working from a framework that was already built for them. Like, Halo already existed in the comics, right? It's, they were, generated by some other person in the comics. And so they're bringing them back into this kind of new story. And so I wonder, we talk a lot about the elasticity of superhero characters, that creators can come in and on board and do what they want with these characters. But I wonder if just the problem here is that these creators, these writers are working from existing frameworks that then they try to reframe and recontextualize to be woke or to be modern, right? But they were problematic to start with. And I wonder if that's just like the problem here, is that, the framework itself is the problem. Because I'm thinking about like creator-owned stories, right? Like I'm thinking about like Saga and Brian.
Yeah, and so one of the things I always tell my students, because I'm a teacher and I get a lot of students that are, trying to be creative writers, or I have friends that are trying to be creative writers. And I get asked the question a lot, how do you write a character that's not like you? They're like, I want to include a queer character. I want to include a minority character, but they're like, but I'm not this and I don't know how to write this. Like, am I still allowed to write this, right? And everything I always tell them, I'm like, I think you're allowed to write them, but do your research, interview people, talk to people, find stories, and help capture that essence, right? And I don't feel like that's
ultimately recognize that that's not your experience, and whatever you commit to paper is only going to be a fraction of that authentic experience, right? So in and I think that's ultimately what it comes down to, right? What I'm asking for is collaboration, right? Writers' rooms that look like the characters that they're trying to present. And if you don't have that experience, but you want to write about that experience in your story, then find that experience and add that experience to your writer's room, right? Because I think that is, I mean, Jen sent me a wonderful video. It was an actor on actor interview between Kerry Washington and Sandra Oh, two of my favorite actresses on the planet, by the way. They are wonderful and they can do no wrong. But anyway, so they were having this conversation and Kerry Washington mentioned something about wanting to have, like their writer's room had different, for Little Fires, they had a writing room that had the experiences that they were writing about in the show, right? And so they were able to kind of project that into their writing. And I think that's a responsibility ultimately of whoever's putting together the writing cast, right? If you're going to talk about non-binary issues, find someone who understands that. They're not going to understand every single aspect of non-binary, right? They're going to understand their own experience and lend that voice, right? But you also have to understand that. And so that means doing that research, but also giving a platform to someone that doesn't look like you, someone who hasn't had your one singular experience, right? And adding them into the conversation and giving them an opportunity to write that experience, if that makes sense.
And I would argue, a lot is happening in my head, because I think our conversation is very relevant to what's happening right now currently with the BLM movement, and white actors now suddenly resigning from their roles playing like black animated characters. So like you have Jenny Slate resigning from playing Molly on Big Mouth. You have Kristen Bell resigning from like Central Park, I think is the show. And you have like a wealth of other white actors saying like, whoops, we're resigning and we're sorry, right? But to Brenda's point, like, it's not just the writing that needs to be needs to have these experience points, right? It's also like the act, who you cast and the characters you choose to portray, right? So like, going back to, the framework of the comic book industry and the superhero industry, I would say like, it's not just about including the appropriate writing voices in the writing room and even in the voice room, right? It's about choosing characters that are appropriate to have these journeys, right? And not just choosing characters that have maybe a lot of history and just thinking, oh, I'm just going to reframe and rework this character to fit my political agenda or my think piece, right? Because I don't think that Halo was that character to revamp, because one, alien, right?
They should have done Tara, in my opinion. I think Tara would have been such a better choice because she was already kind of being trained to be like a weapon instead of a person, and then like finding a place within that felt right.
And that goes back to that understanding the history of the character, right? And understanding what a character like Halo means for the people she's representing, right? And understanding the history of violence that her community has had to endure, and really considering whether or not it's appropriate for you to replicate that trauma on screen, not once, not twice, but multiple times. That's not cool, right? Like, and it bothers me that there wasn't someone who saw that character and thought, hey, maybe we need to cool it, right?
So it's
the lack of humanity with which she was really bothered me.
Right, and maybe not push that characterization, right? Like, I understand the movement behind diversity and inclusion in writing rooms and shows and stuff like that, but if you don't have a character in your rogues gallery that can, effectively deliver that representation, maybe don't pursue that story, right? You can still have different other representations happen on the screen that are just as valuable. And if there is no one in your rogues gallery that can take on that representation, maybe that is a push for you as a writer, as a producer, as an exec producer, as a director to say, or as a creator to say, we don't have the appropriate characters. Can we create a new one and add to the mythology and fabric of the superhero narrative, right? Yeah. That is where you use your privilege to push for more creation and not just sit back and use the characters that you already have, because those characters were created during times and from experience points that are singular and very monolith and very dominant culture. And so you should push for more creation and say, we're gonna, if I understand superheroes have an incredible fan base, and I'm part of that fan base. I will admit it, right? But it's also, and it's both inclusive and exclusive. There's a bunch of problems with the superhero verse, and a lot of your success is going to be driven by your fans, right? And fans that want to see certain characters on your screen. So I think if you have a track record of producing really good shows or having an audience base and say, like, we're going to do 99% characters people are used to, give us one character we can create on the screen that is going to be true to this group.
Yes, all right, Batman, but you're going to get an original
a supporting character. Does not need to be a team. Huh?
I was like, oh yeah, like we'll write Batman, but we're gonna have this character that we're going to create. Like, that's my
Right.
non-negotiable in my contract. Like, or,
Right.
like,
Right.
like, yes, I will
So,
write, dark label Harley Quinn or whatever, or Black Label. But it's like, sure, but you're gonna get this character because it's in my contract. I think would be fantastic. That way new generations and lines can start, because I understand a lot of times people want the line to go a certain way, right? They want Dick to succeed Batman, or to succeed Bruce, right? They like want these orders, but these orders have been in place since forever ago, right? But there aren't new lines to explore and to play with. Like, characters need to be invented. Like, I'm like tired of rehashed and like reimagined. Like, where are the new characters? Like, I think Miles and Kamala are such great examples of new characters taking on old mantles, and I would love to see. I know that like Ironheart didn't do well because Marvel backed down from racism, like when it happened, when they were like being told no by people. They're like, oh, okay, we'll make it go away, sorry. Like, when they should have fought, in my opinion. Because even if it's not the top selling comic at Marvel, it matters to somebody. Like, it, whether that's 1% of their sales, it matters to somebody. And that's what's important. Like, they already make billions. Like, look at every movie they put out. Like, I'm sure they can spare a couple comic sales to help some people have some representation in their very white dominated works. If
So
they
I
want to be
think
true
this brings,
allies.
And you know,
go ahead, Jen.
I want, and I know you're trying to wrap up, but I wanted to bring a comparison point. Here's the difference of Kamala from Marvel's side. Kamala is inhuman. She doesn't find out she has the genetic material to be inhuman, right? But she doesn't find out until Terrigen Mist happens, and she becomes, Miss Marvel, essentially, right? She gets her power set. But she grew up, her entire family was enculturated in Muslim culture. They breathe life, and they live in and they soak in Muslim, and they espouse Muslim ideals and ideologies out, right? They are Muslim. Mm-hmm. Halo is not.
Correct.
Right? When Kamala decides not to use a hijab because she's not a conservative Muslim, that is a choice that's informed by her upbringing. Mm-hmm. When Halo decides to continue using that hijab, she just does it because it's on her head, mm-hmm. on their head, right? It's right. There's no exploration of Halo understanding Gabrielle's or contending with Gabrielle's past and upbringing and like religious values and just self-values. It is, they take on that body, and that is it.
Right.
Thank you, Jen. That's it. Everything you're saying is what I tried to say, but you said it much more eloquently than I. Thank you.
I don't think I did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kamala,
I think you did.
And at the core of Kamala being a hero is her Muslim faith. Like, that's what gets her to save Zoe. Like, she's like, she's like, this thing my dad always quotes when he sees something bad on the news, right? And she's like, I've got, like, this is woven into my fibers as a being, and we don't get that as a driving force in Halo at all. We don't get really anything as a driving force in Halo at all, other than they are kind of into Brienne. And like,
absolutely. And I think that, ultimately, I think that brings us to our final thoughts, right? And that's the question that I'm asking you guys to consider is, and I think we've all kind of alluded to this, but I think we can wrap it up a little bit more succinctly, is, do we think that this is fair representation? And I know we didn't talk too much about Aqualad. We kind of mentioned him, and we talked about him in the periphery, but maybe we can talk about him in our final thoughts. Do you think this is fair representation of the queer community?
I really don't. I think it's too little. I think it's not thought through enough. I don't think it's been researched appropriately. Even with Aqualad, who's now Aquaman, it feels very, it's, mind you, it's only like 5 seconds. Their relationship feels very like, Tula, the love of my life, died, so I guess girls are done for me, so I'm with the boy now. Is kind of like the vibe I got. But again, they've only been on screen like 5 seconds, so I have no idea. But no, I don't think Halo represents well.
Yeah, I would say I would agree with Tori. I don't think it was very thoughtful the way they went about that, discussion point. For all the reasons that I illustrated earlier in the conversation that happened today regarding that, I think they should have created a character or started with the character without the superhero, without the DC history attached to it. I think they could have or chosen a different character that could have inhabited that role a little bit better, right? I always find it very problematic when, minorities or, minority groups or, queer groups are represented as aliens first. Mm-hmm. We don't need more othering to happen. That's the problem. And so I don't think that it was a good representation for that reason. I do like that they just, they handled it was like, oh, they are just mother box. They are neither this or that, right? But they just are. I like that like normalization that happened, but I don't think it was carried out very well overall, right? And with Caldor, I don't know. I think with Caldor, we don't get enough story with Caldor. He gets pigeonholed in the leader role, and most leader heroes don't get much character development. Like he does get a lot of it, but he does, he's also the leader, right? So he's not as interesting as the other characters for that reason. And he really is not present in season 3 for there to be any really strong character development.
He's like there, they kiss, they move on.
Which is, yay, fan service, right? Fangirl service. But again, he's not there. Like, I enjoyed that he became Aquaman. I thought that was a nice moment of character development for Caldor. Everything else is okay.
Right. I think that's an interesting point that you bring up too, right? Because I remember Tori sending us the screenshot of the kiss, and we were all like really excited, and I remember being excited too and seeing the kiss. I'm like, okay, cool. I don't know that I cared enough about his love life before that, one way or the other. That made me care a little bit more, and I was like, okay, that's great. And it was, again, a bizarre moment for me. I'm like, is it that I don't care about his love life that much because he's the leader, right? Like he's a natural born leader. And given all of the media that I've consumed over the years, the leader is always that will have like their squeeze of the week, for lack of a better term. And that's literally how it's presented. And I hate that. But at the same time, that's what I've been given for so long, right? And so I remember having that really weird conversation in my head and thinking, is it that I don't care so much about Caldor's love life because he is the leader, right? And his love life is going to be always secondary to his responsibilities as a leader, right? But then that's also a weird place to be in, because for other characters, their family life, their love life informs their leadership roles, right? And so that's still something I'm really interested in, right? Again, like you, I felt like there wasn't enough. It was just, oh, great moment. We're going to see him more. We're going to see them together a little bit more, because I think that would be a really interesting storyline. And I would like to see that. So, I mean, I keep going back to that. I think I am interested in that, but I want to see more of it because it was so brief. Very much like Korra, right? Last moment of the series, like, oh yeah, by the way, here she is. Right. And it's the same thing with Caldor, right? Very momentary, very brief, and very not the focus. So I like the impulse to include it and not have it be a big deal. So I do appreciate the attempt at normalization. But if you're really going to normalize something, then put it front and center, right? Like, it shouldn't be a background story. It should be something that informs Calder's role as a leader continuously, right? And him having to protect his entire group, but also having to protect this person that he loves and cherishes, right? And if my feelings about Halo were not clear before, I'll make them clear now. Yeah, I don't like this as representation. I don't think it's fair to any group that she's supposed to be representing. At the same time, I feel like it's a clumsy representation, right? At best. And so I hope that this is at least a step toward more inclusivity. But also a call for more respectful treatment of characters like this, right? Characters who identify as non-binary, characters who represent different communities of color. I feel like this model cannot be the only model that we have, because it is not a just and fair model, right? Whatever we get from here on out, writers need to do their due diligence and either at the very minimum do research, but on a better side, diversify those writer rooms and make them more inclusive and more. Don't be afraid to look at those lives, right? And you're right, Jen, create new characters that represent and are intentional in who they are representing, right? And how they're representing that life. Because I think that's really important. So on that note, we're going to be talking about Pose next week, which is a series on FX that highlights a group of trans women who are also women of color. So Tori actually recommended this series to all of us, and I have started watching it, and Jen is going to start watching it tonight. So we're going to be talking about that tomorrow for our recording. We are really excited about this. So please tune in. Thank you for being with us. Stay safe, wear your masks, and we'll see you tomorrow, basically. Bye.
Bye.